It shows that it's working on my end.
We just have to unmute and turn on our cameras to show that we agree with being recorded. So that's, yeah, Teams does things differently than Zoom. Okay, once everyone rejoins with turning on their cameras and microphones, I will kick it off. And I'm going to assume that you all can hear me as you rejoin. Most of you, if not all of you, know me. I'm Sam Gold, I'm Executive Director of RiverCog. Thank you for joining us this evening for our first public meeting on our regional update to our natural hazards mitigation plan. RiverCog has been responsible for regional natural hazard mitigation planning for a number of years, and this is the second or third update RiverCog has done. So this is, I think, the third update that RiverCog has done for our regional natural hazard mitigation plan. This plan covers 15 of our 17 towns, and the idea behind doing a natural hazard mitigation plan and keeping it up to date every few years is to be prepared for known natural hazards, particularly natural disasters that we know that we have threat of affecting us, and identifying what actions we can take to mitigate those future natural hazards and natural disasters, and what preparation can we do today before those hazards cause a problem. But also the other reason to do one of these plans, update the plans and adopt these plans, is it makes our municipalities eligible for funding for preparing for natural hazards or mitigating or preventing them. And in the event of a natural disaster, it unlocks additional funding. So what can be built in the recovery can be built back better. So for this update, we have hired a consultant team that's being led by Scott Chiquette of Dewberry, and he is joined by David Murphy of Resilient Land and Water, and I forgot your name. You just introduced yourself.
Kate Novick, yes, of Gradient Planning.
Gradient Planning, welcome. And for RiverCog, our RiverCog project manager is Margot Burns, our senior environmental planner, and assisting her in this project is Eliza Lopresti, our community planner. And for the members of the public who are joining us, I'll just turn it over to you to introduce yourself. I see Frank first, so Frank, why don't you go ahead? Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. So my name is Frank DeFelice. I am the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission for the town of Durham, Connecticut. I'm also the chair of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission for the town, and I serve as the chair of the Regional Planning Committee for the Lower Connecticut River Valley Council of Governments.
Thank you, Frank. Bob, why don't you go next?
Bob Giammartino, First Selectman, Town of Middlefield.
Thank you for being here. Carol.
Carol Doak Jones, if you go by my full name, but Carol Jones, First Selectman, Deep River. The people that I just did my letter of intent actually and just sent it over when we were, so I had to make sure everybody was on board that I listed the names of. Neither of them could make it tonight, so I'm here.
Thanks,
Okay, and I'm just looking at Julia. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I actually am a member of the Dewberry team. I'm a senior planner. I actually grew up in East Lyme, so I'm excited to be here and learning from all y'all. And yeah, great.
And I'll just say that this project, this update, is being funded by federal funds and town matches that the towns have provided for the non-federal match that's required. And we're excited to be updating this plan once again. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott, and he will start with the presentation.
Sure. And since we're such a small group, please let's keep this informal. Jump in, interrupt, ask questions, put things in the chat, whatever we need to do. I've already learned one thing tonight. I've been working with Julia for 2 or 3 years, and I had no idea that she lived in Deep River in the past. I know that. Good evening, everybody. So we're here tonight to talk about the update to the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. The current plan was adopted in 2021, and an update and refresh and readoption is required every 5 years in order to remain eligible for certain forms of government assistance for hazard mitigation. So, quick agenda. We're going to do an intro of the team, which we've already done, talk about what hazard mitigation is and why we're doing the plan, go through some of the components of it. Tonight's meeting is really just a very brief introductory session to bring people up to speed on what we're doing. And then there'll be additional sessions later when we have results to show. And those will be more interactive and sessions where we can vet things and get your input, but certainly we would like to receive some input tonight. And we do have a couple of questions that we'll ask for folks to either answer live or put into the chat. And then we'll just talk a little bit about what comes next and then open it up for discussion. So we already did the intros. I think we met everybody on the team, the folks listed on the Dewberry team, in addition to those who are here tonight. Jesse Nelson, Victoria Vetri, and Scott Bianati from Dewberry and Resilient Land and Water will also be working on the project over the course of the next year or so. So an interesting piece that we'll talk a little bit more about, we call this the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, but there's been some changes to the guidance, and whereas we used to look at simply a snapshot of time of what the hazards entail today. The plans now are looking a little bit further down into the future and thinking more proactively about how those hazards might change going into the future. It is a 5-year planning horizon, so we sort of are working into we're just considering climate adaptation and climate change and risk in the vulnerability risk assessment and things that we can do today to address things that we know are already happening. But it does take it from a snapshot in time and makes it a little more forward looking. So what is a natural hazard? It's an extreme natural event that poses risk to people, property, and infrastructure and resources. For the local government folks on the phone, a lot of times we think about disasters, we think about floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and things of that nature, and we think about the physical damage that it causes to things like infrastructure and buildings. But frequently with smaller events, the cost to respond with public safety and public works, frequently those expenditures can exceed the dollar damages from the physical damages from the event. So we like to keep focused on resources as well. What is hazard mitigation? It's long-term actions that we take to reduce or eliminate risk to people, property, and resources from natural hazards and their impacts. So, the super simple example on the right, there's a repetitively flood-prone building that was acquired and turned into open space. That's about as pure a form of mitigation as you can get, but we'll talk about other forms of mitigation. But it's things that reduce or eliminate similar damage in a future event. So what we're not doing with this plan is looking at response or recovery. What we're not doing is looking at hazardous materials or man-made hazards. It's really natural hazard related and long-term proactive things that we can do. So climate adaptation is similar to hazard mitigation, but it's adjusting to social, ecological, infrastructure, and economic systems to respond to, manage, and manage and recover from risk. So it goes a little bit further than hazard mitigation, and it looks kind of more at the more rounded picture. The climate adaptation plan is a plan that sets policies and actions for adapting to the effects of climate change, not to be confused with the climate action plan, which Rivercog recently participated in with the Central Connecticut Regional Council of Governments. A climate action plan focuses on reducing carbon emissions and interestingly, the reduction of carbon emissions is in the climate world is referred to as mitigation, which allows people to confuse hazard mitigation with climate mitigation. And adaptation is more similar to traditional hazard mitigation. So we're not focused on a carbon reduction plan with this project. We're focused more on adapting to the changing environment. Why have a plan? Reduces or eliminates the need to respond or lessens the resource burden during response, promotes resilience and sustainability, data sharing between different levels of government. So the idea is that the state of Connecticut has a statewide hazard mitigation plan that feeds data down to the local mitigation plans or the regional mitigation plans. And these plans are more granular and they feed data up to the state plan. So it's kind of a cycle of continuous improvement and data sharing. It supports decision making. I always describe we'll talk about the risk and vulnerability assessment that we do as part of the plan and the capability assessment, but those two things are areas are where we quantify vulnerabilities and we quantify losses from different scenarios, and those quantifications and analysis should help to inform decisions, whether it be capital planning or policy and regulatory actions. We also, again, tend to think about projects and damage when we think about hazard mitigation, but it's dealing with what's already in harm's way, but it's also dealing with policy and things we can do to prevent future development from being placed in harm's way. So it's really two-pronged in that respect. And then the practical reason is the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, which requires this plan to be eligible for certain forms of hazard mitigation assistance. The benefits of combining a plan, it brings the community together to discuss very similar hazards and challenges, helps us to identify and reduce losses from both natural hazards currently and climate change impacts, and keeps community eligible for mitigation grant programs. So those programs, it's an ever-changing environment currently with the grant programs, but the three that from FEMA that are available now are the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which is a post-disaster program. So every time there's a disaster that's presidentially declared in the state of Connecticut, roughly 15% of the total dollar damages from that disaster is made available in the form of hazard mitigation grants after the disaster. And what I'd like to emphasize is that those grants are not limited to the impacted area necessarily. So, for example, with the serious flooding in the Naugatuck Valley that we saw last year, or a coastal storm that impacts Fairfield County, Rivercog can apply for funding even if they weren't impacted by that particular event. You can also apply for funding not related to the event type. So if it was a flood or a hurricane, you can apply for wildfire mitigation if you so choose. There is an HMGP hazard mitigation grant program, post-fire program. It's not used much at all in the state of Connecticut, but it's specifically related to wildfire mitigation. And then there's the flood mitigation assistance program. The flood mitigation assistance program is an annual program where it's designed to address flooding to properties insured by the National Flood Insurance Program. So it's for things like elevation of homes, acquisition of repetitively flooded properties, it's small culvert upgrades and other types of projects that can be done if you can directly prove that they will help to reduce damages to a national flood insurance program insured property. So that one is available annually. This year, there was a significant amount of money available under an add-on to the FMA program called the Swift Current program. All of these programs are administered by the state through DEMIS. So the state is the grantee and local and regional governments are sub-grantees under the programs. And for the most part, there's a 75-25% cost share, with some exceptions under the FMA program for repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties. Also like to point out that we should not look at this plan as simply a plan to address the FEMA requirements. Thinking through risks and vulnerabilities and identifying strategies to address them positions you better for all types of other funding as well, even if the plan is not required. So there's National Fish and Wildlife Fund grants, there's Nature Conservancy grants, there's a deep community resilience fund, and a whole host of others that while they don't necessarily require a plan, having community consensus and an adopted document that's endorsed by the governing body of the community certainly helps with asking for funding under those programs. In terms of the plan update requirements, it is a pretty prescriptive process. FEMA requires a planning process where you have to keep close track of who is involved and how they were involved, how they contributed. There's established methods for monitoring, maintaining, and updating the plan. There's specific requirements for the risk assessment, which we'll go through shortly. There's certain requirements for the mitigation strategy and actions where you have to have goals, a means of measuring progress, evaluating the actions and implementing them, and then improving mitigation capabilities. So we'll go through in a little more detail some of those, but there are some pretty specific requirements that we have to follow. And one of the most challenging ones is public participation and stakeholder participation. So certainly by being here tonight, you're not only providing input, hopefully, but also helping us to meet those requirements. What's changed since 2021? There's new guidance written in 2023 for local mitigation plans. Very similar. It did include enhanced consideration of climate change and adaptation, requires the inclusion of community lifelines, and that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If you're a very rural community, the local grocery store might be a community lifeline, or it could be a critical bridge, or an infrastructure element, or a hospital, or anything that's basically, if you think about your community and what would hurt the most to lose, that's a that's a community lifeline, right? Increased emphasis on future development, which is not a huge issue in the lower Connecticut River Valley. And then increased emphasis on high hazard potential dams and social vulnerability. So some of those things will look a little bit different in this plan than they did in the previous one. And that migration from a natural hazard mitigation plan to a hazard mitigation and climate adaptation plan. All that said, there's an executive order now that says you don't have to do anything related to climate change, but since things keep that, so they didn't rescind the guidance, they just said you don't have to follow it. But I think what we've decided collectively as a group is that we're going to follow it anyways, because A, it makes good sense to, and B, things inevitably will change moving forward. So I think it makes sense to meet the current guidance. The planning process, this is a simplified version. There's a lot more to it, but it's meeting with community representatives, which we've done. We have had one community meeting with each of the 15 communities that are participating. And each community has its own local, there's a regional hazard mitigation planning team that's comprised of RiverCog staff and the elected officials of all of the communities. And then each community has what we call a local planning team, which is usually two to five individuals within that community who are sort of responsible for walking through this process with us. And I heard Carol say that she submitted from Deep River her letter of intent today. So that means we now have a local mitigation or local planning team established in each community. But anyways, the process, we meet with the community representatives, discuss what's changed in terms of hazards since the last update, what events they've had, what's changed in terms of critical infrastructure, how they've progressed with the mitigation strategy for their community since 2021. And there'll be a second series of those meetings where after the risk assessment is done, where we'll talk about, based on the new findings, what should be done in the next 5 years to reduce or eliminate hazards. So a lot of times strategies get in there, and for a variety of reasons, usually funding, they can't be done. And sometimes it makes sense to carry them forward. Other times new projects and strategies emerge. We conduct community engagement to collect feedback from residents on experiences with natural hazards, which is what we're here for tonight. Coordinate with representatives to identify strategies and actions, develop draft plans, and then go through the review and approval process with Dennis to review the plan. We incorporate their comments. They submit it to FEMA. We incorporate FEMA's comments, and then each of the participating communities adopts their own annex to the regional plan. Public outreach is part of the planning process. It's a requirement. Public can be residents, it can be business owners. There's also a stakeholder engagement component where we have to engage neighboring communities, groups like, it's not specific exactly who, but large employers, chambers of commerce, neighborhood associations, other agency partners, and non-government organizations like nonprofits, land trusts, folks like that. So if you have any ideas in terms of stakeholders you think should be interested or should be involved in the process, please pop those into the chat. We'd like to hear from you on that. There is a chat feature at the top that we encourage you to use. And there's also a little hand that you can click on to raise your hand if you have a question. So for the outreach strategy, we'll be doing a series of virtual workshops and public meetings. We will be very shortly putting out an online survey, which will ask all the communities to help us broadcast and share. RiverCog's website has updates where these meetings are posted. Drafts of the plan will be posted. The 2021 plan is there. It's a good way to keep track of what's going on. We will look to community champions and stakeholders for engagement, where we'll reach out specifically to them. And then we'll use things like video recordings like we're doing tonight, and story maps and other things to try to make sure that we get that input that we need. For a long time now, even before the pandemic, we're discovering that most of the other things on this chart work a lot better than the traditional public meetings do, for some of the reasons we were talking about at the beginning of the meeting. Dave, you want to talk about how we're trying to increase consistency with other plans and programs?
Sure, I can take a couple slides. Hi, everyone, David Murphy. So one thing that's been nice about the past 5 years since the last edition of this plan is some of the towns in the region have been starting to get pretty active with resiliency planning, which largely includes the natural hazards that we're talking about and has a climate element that kind of looks forward into the future a little bit. So now that we're updating this hazard mitigation plan, we can sweep some of these efforts right back into it and position them for federal funding, which is exactly what we all want to be trying to do. So, for example, East Haddam and Portland have recently finished projects under the Resilient Connecticut brand. So Resilient East Haddam was about the Sugar Brook corridor and flooding that occurs near Goodspeed And then Resilient Portland project was about flooding that occurs in between 3 critical facilities, the police station, the library, and the senior center. And actually water has flooded into the senior center, and which is also the food pantry. So it's an important project for Portland, and a very important one for East Haddam. So those are now completed in the past couple months, and we're going to work closely to bring some of those recommendations into this hazard mitigation plan. We'll also be looking at the regional plan of conservation and development that RiverCog has completed over the past couple of years. Some of the Sea Grant funded resilience planning that's going on. Essex, Deep River, and Chester are all participating in that. And then the regional climate action plan that Scott referenced earlier. This is just the same thing, but with fewer words, just a graphic that shows how they all need to work together. And we'll be taking care of that kind of quietly, but as we go through the planning process, we'll bring some of these ideas forward for additional engagement.
Thanks, Dave. It's really all about building a project pipeline. That's the bottom line for this. The hazard ID and risk assessment is what we'll be working on next. It's the heaviest lift piece of the project. That's why we'll disappear kind of for the next few months when we do that, and then the next interaction we'll have with the towns and the public will be to show those results. So I guess again, emphasizing that we can use the chat, that the hazards that are in the current plan are shown in the box at the bottom. I won't go through all of them. Any feedback on whether these still make sense, whether there should be any changes in priority based on what's happened in the last 4 years or so. We will be rearranging these a little bit along a climate aligned taxonomy. So for example, we'll be looking at we'll be clumping them sort of by atmospheric hazards, hydrologic hazards, wildfire, and geologic hazards. Maybe not exactly like that, but some way we'll be organizing them. We'll still be analyzing each one individually, but that will just look a little bit different. Any thoughts on these? Are these still the relevant ones? I will say that the region-wide committee thought they were, and the towns, their first meetings all concurred, but I'd be happy to hear any additional thoughts or feedback.
We heard wildfires was something we should take a better look at from many towns.
Yeah. One other change that we think we're going to make is extreme heat. There's a lot going on with extreme heat at the state level, and there's funding that's currently available for it. And a lot of times it can be combined with other hazards, like you can combine a green infrastructure project that addresses flooding or flood storage, but also provides heat benefits. And when you're doing a benefit cost analysis to prove that your project is cost effective, the heat components can significantly help. So we do think we will add an extreme heat component to the plan this time. But other than that, we're gonna, I think, leave it alone unless we get feedback otherwise.
Carol, did you have a comment? You had your hand raised.
I was talking to our local representative. So Deep River doesn't have any publicly owned dams. So that concerns me, these plans. I'm assuming they're all like municipal or town-owned property that we're really addressing, or are we actually addressing some of the privately owned dams that we have as well? Because if something happens, we should have them in our plan, but again, like, do we have permission to go on their property to address it? Or, it's seems a little confusing there, like who would be able to, I mean, for public safety, I guess the town would be able to go onto their property, but.
Yeah, so
we include those,
we do include them in the risk and vulnerability assessment. And then in terms of hazard mitigation, barring like emergency actions, but thinking about long-term actions, if a private dam owner wanted to access federal funding to do something with a dam, see, none of these grant programs are available to private citizens. there, but if the town wanted to work with the private dam owner to do a mitigation project, you could apply for a grant as a sub-grantee and contract with that private property owner to do the work on their property. So there are ways to do work on private property. It's done frequently throughout the state of Connecticut, but it's completely voluntary. It's it's up to unless there's some imminent threat and you have an authority to make something happen. That's a different story. But in terms of proactive projects, it would be up to the dam owner to want to participate. And if they're a willing participant, then it can be done.
Mhm. Thank you.
All right.
Is there a way, or I'm not exactly sure how it's gonna work but in my town, there's what I think are the two biggest hazards that we need to mitigate is that we have a single point of entry to our Beesick Lake neighborhood. Is over 200 houses with a single point of entry. Should that entry get washed out in a storm, or should even just an oil truck tipping over on the road and shutting down access can create an issue. So that's a local one, but so that needs to be prioritized on a local level. The other issue that we have that's much more significant, and I'm sure Frank will agree with this, is the Coginchaug River flows through 8 different communities, and it flows actually south to north and then empties into the Connecticut River. And the main channel of the river has been congested with trees toppling over and such, like with all of the different, the woolly indulgent with the ash borer. We've got a lot of dead trees. They're blocking the river. And every time it rains, we're shutting down 3 and 4 roads in our town. And the river, of course, is backing up into, you know, Durham and then down into Guilford, So I think it's more of a regional issue. And we don't have the funds to clear the river. The river is obviously owned by the state. It travels through 8 towns. 30% of the watershed is in the town of Middlefield, and 95% of my town drains into that river. So it's extremely significant. And
Yeah.
in the picture I have, which I was trying to bring up, but I can't locate it, is in one of these floods. It's an extremely healthy river. It now has locally breeding river trout. It does get stocked, but it's got now a local population of trout. It is so healthy that in one of the floods, I have a picture of a great blue heron fishing the river while standing in the middle of Strickland Road. Okay, you see the yellow line coming into it, you see the yellow line going out to it, you don't see the road, and there's the heron in the middle of it fishing. So it's, I need help. I will say we are taking action. We have a meeting next week. We have some of the folks from Connecticut Fisheries coming up to speak to us about the river. But I think this is broader. I think it requires fishery. I think it requires maybe Army Corps of Engineers. I don't know who can get in and clear a channel because the culverts going under the roads are sufficiently sized, but the trees are blocking the water flow and it's backing up. So it's overflowing the banks of the river, not because it can't get through the openings. It's because there's other blockages in the river.
So I will emphatically follow up. Hopefully you can hear me. That it is so bad that there is no natural hazard that comes close in impact to what's happening in Durham and Middlefield, because the DEP will not clean that river. And if anyone else does, they're probably going to be in big trouble. But the simple fact is it must be cleaned. It's backed up. We've had property owners come into inland wetlands crying to us. I mean, it's really bad. It backs up Middlefield, Durham, and as was stated, the culverts are properly sized. It's not a culvert issue. The river never flowed where it's flowing now. I have aerial photographs going back to 1935 showing the roadways, showing the culverts when they were first made. That river never, ever flowed where it's flowing now. And it isn't because of an increase in water. It is because it's backed up. It's got log jams all up and down it. There are areas where the silt has filled in the channel. So the water flows and then it just goes all over the place. And this is not a natural condition. It's not a condition that can persist. And of all the things in the plan for Durham, that is far and away the number one hazard.
It's
There,
one of
I,
ours.
I
too.
would almost go as far as to say there are really no other natural hazards. Certainly there are none that come close. So the one thing that the plan must have in it is the fact that this is a significant issue. And I hate to say this, but it's being caused because the DEP doesn't clean the river, and they won't.
It's neglected. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to point of reference, I don't know if it was 8 years ago or so, state DOT raised the elevation of the route. I think it's 147 as it goes out of Middlefield into Durham at Lyman Golf Course. They raised that road about 6 to 8 feet to prevent it from being flooded. The last 2 or 3 years, we've closed that at least 3 or 4 times because it's been flooded.
Right.
So I
We-
mean, I'm
we've
just
got- yeah.
just a point of reference there. And then
Yeah.
one of the other hazards that you don't have listed here, and I'm very surprised, and I think we should have it, is, for lack of a better term, invasive species.
It's right.
Because we have, I happen to live directly across the street from Wadsworth Falls State Park. I walk in there every morning with my dogs. That looks like, there are times you walk in there, it looks like the aftermath of the Battle of the Ardennes. The number of trees that are down, we have lost all of the large pine trees to the woolly indulgent. We have lost all of the ash trees to the emerald ash borer. The maple trees are now getting decimated by a fungus that's killing all of the maple trees. We have a property, Cohill property, that the town owns that abuts the woodland, that abuts the reservoirs from Middletown, which are located in Middlefield, but they're owned by Middletown. And the canopy of that forest is gone. And so all of the invasive weeds, like the mile-a-minute weed and others, are growing like crazy because there is now no canopy because these other invasive species have taken that out. And there is no plan in the state. Now that the Cohill is our private state forest, there seems to be no plan in the state to help with attempting to mitigate these disasters that are occurring. And it's wiping out the trees, and it's going into even private properties. And again, the Coginchaug River, the entire riverway, all the trees along that river, the larger ones, are dying and falling over into the river, blocking the flows of the channel. I mean, it's building on itself, but I think we ought to try to add that to this hazard mitigation plan.
I also want to follow up on that because we have the same issue here. And I have brought this to the attention of Margot and other people, and it has fallen on deaf ears. All they worry about is hydrilla, hydrilla, hydrilla. Ornamental bittersweet is taking all of these trees out. I mean, huge sections, huge. And when you tell people about it, they say, well, yeah, that's listed as an invasive species. We should do something about that. But no, there's no discussion. There's no money. There's no nothing for this. Ornamental bittersweet is far worse than hydrilla. If you drive up even 91 North going to Hartford and look to the right, there's nothing left because you can see where it's strangled everything that's dead and is standing. We've got it in Durham, all over the place.
Yeah.
It never was like this.
Yeah. I think invasive species need to be addressed, and I think it's at the state level, because I certainly don't have the resources. I'm a very small town. I have 2,200 properties that are taxable. You know, it's a very small town with very limited resources, yet we have some of the most, we're basically Central Connecticut's playground with our golf courses, our ski area, our mountain biking, our state parks. We are Central Connecticut in our lake. We are Central Connecticut's playground, and it's getting decimated by these natural disasters.
Yeah.
Sam, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say that although Rivercog has focused on aquatic invasives, it does not necessarily mean that terrestrial invasives are ignored, but they are incredibly difficult to address, and it's an issue that is statewide, it's national, and the insects that we're dealing with that are killing the trees, the plants such as, once you start recognizing these plants like Japanese knotweed, you see it everywhere. And you see the missteps that are taken in various places, like, DOT clears an area along a highway, doesn't properly reseed it, and then suddenly it's all Japanese knotweed and other invasives. But they are, comparing one invasive to another, they are all incredibly expensive and difficult to address, and they're all a major issue. When it comes to the hazard to people's property and lives, the trees are probably the most significant, because trees, weakened trees that are dead from the emerald ash borer or one of the other insects or diseases, lands on a house, lands on a person, lands on a car. And then secondarily, a tree can take out a road as well. So probably for the purposes of this plan, that should be sort of the lens that we look at, where the focus should be on, how do we protect the public's health and safety, particularly in a future tropical storm or hurricane, or freak fall snowstorm or ice storm that could take out weakened trees.
And I just want to add that we actually did have this, it's on the screen. We do have that listed as one of our hazards.
Oh,
And,
I'm sorry, I didn't see it. You're right.
No, that's okay. But just to let you guys know, and it was listed in the last plan and will be again this plan. And terrestrial invasives were also addressed. And I will say that I think, and Scott can correct me, but we are one of the only regions that have that listed as a hazard in our area. At least we were probably one of the first. Others may have followed. So we are really trying to address that.
Sam, to your point, this is a much larger issue than possibly even the COG, but if all of the other COGs are not focused on it and applying pressure at the state level, I don't know how we're going to get the state to wake up. And I contacted DEEP several years ago when the first mile a minute weed, was in my backyard, and I'm across the street from a state forest. And I asked them, and this was before it was prevalent in the state. And I called in, and I'm like, do you want to come out and properly identify it before I burn it? Because it's the only way to get rid of it. And they had no interest in even coming out and talking about it, or trying to, keep an eye out to mitigate, to make people aware of what it is if they see it. I mean, it's just devastating. And so, yeah. But anyway,
and I think this is a regional plan. I mean, this hazard mitigation plan is regional. So although I agree that this is a large issue statewide, I think for us, it's got to be mentioned in there, and it's got to be one of the things that's highlighted, because Sam, you point out, and you're right, it's a safety thing, trees, weekend coming down, storms, that sort of thing, blocking roads, and because of invasives. All right. Uh, so I definitely, I know it's listed on the list, but I want to see some specific actions that we take in the plan to mitigate the invasives, the which have to do with trees, invasive species of weeds, that sort of thing, rather than just concentrating on hydrilla.
Yeah, and I think there's actually a two-pronged sort of focus. It's treating and eradicating invasives where they can be, but realizing that there's limits to what can be done. Also taking down those risky trees. A few years back, when we were looking at the invasive species killing our trees, we tried to get Eversource together with DEEP and the towns and their public works crews, because those are the three entities who are responsible for roads and utility lines, and they also, all three of them, work on trees. And the issue that we have here is that the town can spend a fortune on tree removals and still not do enough to keep up with the trees that are dying and posing as a hazard. So I don't know if dead or dying trees can be it can be added to this list, but it's sort of a sub bullet to the invasive species, because that's where the invasive species most dramatically impacts public health. Although the invasive species impacts public health and safety in other ways too. It could affect public water supply and water quality. It could affect other economics, especially if your landscape looks like a war zone. Or the Ardennes. Yeah. So.
No, but
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that we can also do from a mitigation perspective is we actually included financing in our budget this year to plant trees to replace trees that have been taken down on town property. And those can be very expensive endeavors, plus making sure that you properly water them once they're planted. So our fire department's Explorer group is in charge of watering trees. But I mean, these are actions that can also be taken as part of our plan to reforest. But of course, I'm not going to go in and do a state forest. I'm not allowed to legally, and I don't have the funding to do it. But what efforts are there that are being undertaken to help reforest these things?
But reforesting, helps prevent erosion and also helps with absorbing stormwater. There's all sorts of benefits there, and that it's a proactive mitigation activity to avoid those future issues.
Yeah, I
think it might be helpful.
I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one last comment I had is when I was researching the river basin for Coggin-Choggin, there was a plan in place, and then I was looking at what creates a healthy environment for the forest animals, the small animals, the birds, the butterflies, the bees, the fish. What makes it healthy? And they said, in a given one, for every acre, you should have 1 or 2 large dead trees for housing, certain insects and woodpeckers and stuff like that. And you walk into these forests now and you look, and there's a large dead tree every 5 feet. It's not 1 per acre or 2 per acre. I mean, it is just, it's just unbelievable. And, that's some mornings I don't even want to go into the forest because it's so depressing.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, Frank, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's quite all right. I was just going to say under invasive species, I think it would be appropriate to add another bullet, which would have to do with the need to either maintain or reforest and the removal of trees which have been affected. I mean, that's a long description. I'd like to see something probably more concise than that, but something to do with this tree issue.
Yeah, I will say that the 2021 plan had mitigation strategies related to tree removal in almost every annex, if not every annex in the entire region. But I hear you loud and clear. I heard from, I didn't attend the Middletown meeting. I think you did, David, but I did
Middlefield,
attend the
yeah.
Durham meeting, and we've documented everything that you've said and acknowledge it. And we will take a look at that section of the plan and see what we can do to address it more
Scott,
robustly
if I
than
could
last
also
time.
react to this, Scott, I just wanted to say that this is all really helpful discussion because when we did this 5 years ago, these issues were like postscripts. There, the basic access was mentioned, but it wasn't really elevated to a severe issue. But then when Circa came back 2 years later to talk about resilient Connecticut, the basic access was at that point in time a big issue. So things do change over time and priorities change, and that's exactly why sometimes it's exhausting to do these plans every 5 years, but it's really helpful to hear that
Yeah.
priorities have changed and we can capture that in the plan.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you've got three strong ones. Probably the most important, I think, for Durham and Middlefield is going to be this Coggin River issue needing to be cleaned. And then the second, I think, has to do with the trees or the access over to Bezic. Take your pick, but those are the three items that I see.
From Middlefield, from a regional perspective, the Coggin River, absolutely. From a town perspective, the access to the lake,
Mhm.
that Beesick Lake access, there's just one small road in and out, over 200 households. Once that road is severed for whatever reason, I've got 200 households that can't get any medical, police, fire attention. People can't get out, they can't get in. The only access is for us to go from boat launch to beach to evacuate people medically. Either get help or supplies in or out, and
Yeah,
it's not appropriate.
no, I understand. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
All right. We have 2 minutes remaining on the scheduled meeting. I'd be happy to stay and go through the rest of it as long as it takes.
Sorry,
will.
I took you away.
No. This conversation is far more important than the slides in the slide deck. This is exactly what we hope to receive when we do public meetings, is input like this. So we can shift course. I don't want to keep people too long in overtime on a beautiful evening, but this conversation alone was the type of input that we're looking for when we do these meetings. So appreciate it. The rest of the slides, honestly, they're more designed for the public. Most of you have probably heard this before, so we can go I will skim over it, and if you see anything that is interesting and you want me to stop, please do so.
Sure.
So for each of these hazards, we look at them from a variety of ways, but basically we profile them. That's what's changed, directly relevant to this conversation. If climate change has an impact, we look at that. We look at what's happened in the last 5 years. We look at what the vulnerabilities are, and if we can quantify losses in dollars, we do that. We look at the probability of future events and how they sync up with the state mitigation plan. I had some questions, but I think we've heard on these on a scale of 1 to 10. What are you concerned about? I heard that loud and clear. Which hazards do you feel pose the greatest threat to your community? I heard that loud and clear. Can you remember a time when you're impacted by natural hazards? We're hearing that. So After we complete the risk and vulnerability assessment and the loss system estimation, we'll look at capabilities of each of the communities, and those are just basically what has changed since your last plan in terms of your ability to administer mitigation. Do you have any new regulations, policies, things like that? So that if there's gaps that can be identified that could be addressed by a mitigation strategy, we're looking at that too. So think of the risk assessment and the capability and capacity assessment as the homework that informs the investment, which is mitigation strategy. We've got three goals in the plan. One deals with future development through policy planning and regs. The other deals with protecting things that already exist. And the third deals with the people component. So outreach, education. A lot of these issues are on private property and need to be solved with private funding. So those three broad goals kind of capture everything. This was intended for the public. I don't think I need to go through it very much. It just shows like the buckets of hazard mitigation strategies. So any one of these buckets could probably apply to the invasive species issue. These are flood mitigation specific examples. Other strategies for non flood hazards, hardening utilities, burying underground lines, backup sheltering and cooling centers, bracing systems, things like that. There's a picture over here of a dry hydrant for fire suppression, hurricane shutters for wind. So those are the types of strategies that we'll talk about in more detail in our next round of local community meetings and at the next public meeting when we present the results of the risk assessment. Next steps in this process. This is the schedule, pretty much on track so far. We're in the midst of data collection. We've done the first series of public meetings. There will be a survey that will come out over the summer and be open for about 3 months. We'll complete the capability assessment and the risk assessment between now and late fall, early winter. And then we'll have that second round of community meetings and another public meeting. I'm hoping it'll be a little bit before December, where we'll present those results and go into actually developing the strategy. And then we'll go through the whole submission and review process with Demis and FEMA. Next steps, I was gonna ask for people to put their contact information, emails and things in the chat, but this is easy enough with the transcription. We all know each other, so we don't need to do that, but we will be getting that survey out. We'll ask for your help in getting that out to the public at large using social media, your websites, whatever ways you use to communicate with the public. We'll begin that process of developing an annex for each community. We'll be reaching out to you with probably questions and data requests as we go through that process. We'll distribute drafts as we go along. When we complete drafts, for example, of the invasive species section, we'll put that out to you to review and comment on as we move forward. And then there'll be 2 more public meetings. As I said, the next one will be to share the risk assessment results and then move into the strategy development. And then the third one will be to present the draft plan.
So can we talk a little bit about that quickly?
Yep.
The last go around, and I think Dewberry was involved.
Yeah.
Durham received a map, which was not well received, to put it mildly. I'm not sure where the information came from. It wasn't from FEMA. Is that map prepared already, or is that map going to be prepared? Are you going to be able to send me a draft of that?
That was a pluvial flood hazard map that was developed using a statistical approach for flood susceptibility. Nothing has been done with that map since the last plan update. So the results, the only thing that would potentially be done is we would use it as an overlay again to see what was in those pluvial flood hazard areas. So there will be, I mean, you haven't had a tremendous amount of development in Durham, so there wouldn't be anything that you didn't see the last go around. That was a separate project, separate from the mitigation plan, that was incorporated into the mitigation plan the last go around. So nothing will change with that.
But updating that map or that methodology is not part of this project.
Right.
All right, well, I'm glad I know that now. So I'll communicate that up and let that be known, because last time that was one of the reasons that we had to file the letter with the plan, the addendum.
Yeah, I recall.
All right.
So in terms of immediate next steps, in terms of communication with the public, we are producing a quarterly newsletter from the town hall that has been very, very well received in our community. People are actually looking forward to seeing it when it comes. I think this may be something we should have an article in it about the natural hazards mitigation plan that's being conducted by Rivercog, and that there's surveys, because it looks like the survey time is coming out. If there is something that you can pull together that could go into my newsletter, I need it by August 15th to meet the September 5th publication. So is there something you guys can put together, and then we can, what is this? How does it work, etc. The newsletter goes out. It's roughly 16 8.5 by 11 pages.
Nice.
I probably wouldn't give you more than one 8.5 by 11 page. So
Half would
it's
be
kind
fine.
of your guideline, half to 1 page.
Scott, I've got some good examples I can send over to you.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we want to do. And Julia, if you're still listening, if you could add that to our internal agenda for our next internal tag up,
Yep,
please.
you got it.
Thanks. Yeah, that
And you
we can definitely do.
you mention the fact that we discussed, that the major issues for Middlefield have been discussed and will be incorporated in this plan, this regional plan, that then may make us eligible for FEMA or federal funding to help with mitigation, et cetera. That would be appropriate.
It's exactly
Thank
the type of thing we want to do. I know I blasted through the last half, but I think you all got your concerns out that you wanted to get out. Are there any additional questions or things anybody would like to discuss?
Thank
All right,
you
well,
all for taking the time to do this with us. I really appreciate it.
Yes, same here.
Yeah,
And thank you for
thank
coming out
guys.
tonight.
Thanks for jumping on and having a nice, robust conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank
All right.
Everyone, thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Have a good night.